your pre-lunch session. Casinos, it's time to turn to video games. I'm joined by Dr. Brett Abarbanel, Callum Scott, Luke Cotton and John Winkle. And we're discussing the crossover between video games and casinos, obviously. It starts with the somewhat contentious thing, the age of slots is over. Brett, we've talked about this already, but if you could go over your points of view on this question, first of all, please.
Sure. So, as sometimes happens, the description of some of these sessions puts forward some postulations regarding what's actually happening in casinos and gambling more broadly. And I would certainly disagree. I don't think the age of slots is over. I would certainly agree that it's aging, both as a population and as a general concept. But innovation in machine gambling, whether it be as a traditional slot machine as we know it, whether it be some of the fruit machines that you see in the pubs here, whether it be some of the VLTs that you see in other jurisdictions around the world, are still quite popular. They're so popular that here in the UK, there was just this massive movement to get them removed from the betting shops where they were housed, all down excuse me, I almost said Main Street, I'm not at home, the High Street. And so because of this, we can see that there is quite a lot of popularity for this type of machine gambling. The slot machine as we know it in the traditional land-based casino is still quite popular. Many of the casinos around this country, in this jurisdiction, are still interested in having more slot machines in their businesses because they still generate a huge amount of revenue for those properties. That being said, the demographic that enjoys slot machines as we currently know them is aging. There was this very popular study done probably about 15 years ago now that found that the average age of a slot player was about 40 to 45 years old. The same study was conducted about 10 years later, and it found that the average age of the slot player was about 50 to 55 years old, that exact 10-year difference since they had done the original study. There was not a substantial replacement for that aging population who was playing the game. So when we look at this as an industry, whether it be land-based casino, whether it be online gambling, whether it be somebody who's interested in esports and then expanding into the gambling space, it's important to recognize that this form of gambling consumption very much still exists. It is very much still popular, but the replacement of this aging population is something that casinos are trying to deal with.
Now, the obvious question here is why should esports be or video gamers, why should that be the demographic switch?
Would you like me to answer that?
Yeah,
or do you want me to hand over to...
If Brett goes first, and then
okay.
we'll answer it.
So it's my perspective, and I try and look at the gambling world fairly holistically in the position that I hold as an academic. I have the luxury of being able to wax eloquent on certain topics without necessarily having to worry about the financial ramifications of certain decisions. That's the benefit of living in a university. I think that esports is one of those wonderful concepts, I'm a huge fan of it, that can be used as one of the potential changes in product mix for a gambling entity, again, whether that be a land-based casino or other form of gambling business, because it is something that very obviously attracts the demographic that casinos are trying to use to replace some of their other aging demographics.
Yeah, I think for us, sort of looking at esports and gaming and how that can kind of drive the younger demographic into our venues it's just one part of our strategy in terms of becoming more of a better venue for younger people. You know, the rest of my team look at other up-and-coming ways of events and entertainment to try and drive new people into our business. So obviously the esports side is just one of many that we're looking into.
Luke, do you see a connection? Maybe to an extent you're coming from the online casino space, or at least the online space generally. Do you see the link there between esports and online casinos?
Yeah, I mean, it's been seen over time already that fans are prevalent to gamble on online casinos, and I don't mean online casinos in the traditional sense of the regulated gambling operators. However, skin betting has a huge crossover into casino games, which aren't necessarily your typical roulette, and that's also led into a lot of product that's specific for these platforms, which has been built because they've been built by people who aren't from a casino background. So for example, when I talk about skin betting, these are in-game items. It's typically in certain games that this applies. So for example, Counter-Strike and Dota would be the two most prevalent ones. And these virtual items can be sold on third-party marketplaces. So essentially they're cash, but it's just a slightly more convoluted process. And there was a big thing kind of 4 or 5 years ago when this rose in prominence significantly. So in terms of betting handle on esports matches across a year with skins is cumulatively into the billions of dollars. And there are also casino products. Now these aren't necessarily typical roulettes, but even new products where it's a random number generator, everyone pulls their money into a pot, the house takes a rake, and it spits out a random number and somebody wins. So we've already seen customers go crazy for this, potential customers. So yeah, clearly a prevalence to playing on online casino games at least.
Yeah. What's in you, Callum? You've been doing some events up and down the country, and John's very much been involved in the mechanics of that. We'll get around to asking John about how you put these events on, but what's the kind of reaction you're getting from the audience in terms of esports audience, and what about the rest of the casino audience?
It's been really interesting actually. From sort of the esports side, we've had really good feedback. They like what we're doing. We're trying to remove some of the reasons why people wouldn't normally go to a LAN event or a competition. So part of what we did, we pretty much toured the country. We did everywhere from sort of Reading all the way up to Glasgow. So anyone that's been to LANs knows that if you live a reasonable distance away, you've got to pay train tickets. Lumping your PC on and off trains isn't a great experience, especially with some of that we've had. So, being able to create a low-cost solution to that has been, the feedback I've had really quite good at that. From the casino side, it's been really interesting. The point of the tournament was to kind of see what the reaction was, really. And kind of just gather some information around what it could possibly do for us by putting these tournaments on, and what our assumptions were, what we were hearing from the experts, such as Luke and John, around what these guys want and the demographics. It's pretty much come exactly what we expected. So when we talk about the younger demographics and what our larger team's trying to achieve, it's ticked all the boxes that we wanted it to tick.
Yeah. John, what are the mechanics of putting a tournament together in a European casino sense?
Well, particularly UK, I think we've struggled with real basic practical issues with some of the venues, in that it's a UK casino is perhaps not what you see elsewhere around the world in terms of space and infrastructure. So the tour we've done has often been sort of cramming the tournament into a space where we can, and I think it's fair to say we've had some challenges around scheduling as well. So we're trying to do something within the group that's very new and unheard of, and where we've had to maybe cancel acts that have been booked or move poker tables from their normal spaces. It's got some interesting reactions from managers. The biggest challenge was probably around IT. All of a sudden, us coming and asking to plug in a load of computers to a fairly secure casino IT network has certainly raised a few eyebrows with their IT guys. So some interesting learning from a tournament operator point of view. But on the upside, we've got very secure venues, which certainly over the past few weeks is extremely important. Venues which are very friendly and accessible. So the staff on the ground in all of the venues have been probably more welcoming than I've seen in any tournament venue that I've worked in, just because that's how they're used to talking to customers on the casino floor. So yeah, a lot to learn, but easy things to fix, I think, to do again in the future.
Is it a different scale of event in Vegas compared to what John and Callum are putting on here?
So specifically to Las Vegas, because across the United States the scale is massive, and frankly even within Las Vegas it tends to be fairly massive as well. We have some facilities like what Callum and John have described, quite similar to the casino facilities here in the UK. in the sense of size and scope. We have, I think you said about 150 people were coming in for an event on average, yes? Or is that that's average?
We're getting sort of between 60 and 100 players coming along.
Which is for what, a weekly event or so?
Yeah, we did. It was a day event, so the dwell time was quite...
So quite a solid turnout for something like this, especially given the space in which you're putting it. We see similar things like this in Las Vegas, scaled all the way up. And one of the things that has really been significant about the Las Vegas space is because it is so broad and its entertainment and hosting infrastructure for tourism is so broad, the city and the entities within it have been able to experiment with different forms of esports installations. So we've seen everything from the local gaming lounge that's down the street in suburbia where you can bring your kids and hang out for an hour, so then you don't have to buy the PS4 for your house, and they get their 2 hours, however long you want to take them there, and then you can go home. Scaled all the way up to when Riot brought the LCS Spring Split to Mandalay Bay, or when we had DreamHack in town, something like this.
What's the LCS?
Everybody in this room knows, Scott. No, I'm kidding. The League of Legends Championship Series. So when the Spring Split was in Las Vegas, we had this at Mandalay Bay in the same event center where J-Lo performs. So it's a huge, huge event center. It was, for the most part, sold out, certainly sold out on the last days. But one of the interesting things about this event was that Las Vegas hadn't really thought about what an esports event is like. It was at this time, this would have been April of 2016. This was still somewhat early days for Las Vegas esports, and even major esports events more generally as they've sort of starting to permeate into the United States. In Las Vegas, one of the things that we're used to is everybody likes to do everything. They might not want to do every single thing that's there, but the population, when it comes in, to use that same J-Lo example, will like to go out, go eat in the restaurants that are there. They'll walk around in the hallways in between acts, say she has an opening act. But what happened with the LCS split is that during the actual games, everybody was in the arena and nobody was walking around buying a beer or some cocktail or getting a snack. Everybody was there watching the event. This was extremely unusual for the people who were working at Mandalay. There was even an article in our local newspaper the next day where they were interviewing people who worked at this facility because it was such a strange phenomenon to them that everybody would actually be attending the event for which they had paid for a ticket. Mandalay and MGM, who runs Mandalay, thought that everybody who came, they would do the same thing. They would embrace the product mix that was there at this event. They would go eat in the restaurants, stay in the rooms. What ended up happening was a huge amount of the attendees were walking across the street, picking up McDonald's, and then coming back to the event. And their food and beverage outlets didn't really enjoy the kind of patronage that they thought that they might. Now, if you've been to Mandalay, it's probably a little bit more expensive than your average esports attendee or spectator wants to spend. I'm a 33-year-old college professor with a full-time job, and I'm not always crazy about spending plenty of money at Mandalay Bay. But this was one of those initial installations where the city, really quite rather holistically, was able to learn from this kind of thing. And each installation has been slightly different since then. You see some of these casinos are approaching it from a production standpoint. Caesars created the Caesars Studio, where esports is just part of the production studio that they would like to put in there. They had a very successful drone racing broadcast that they put into that space. They're also looking to bring in a few regular leagues there. They had an H1Z1 league that goes through that studio. You can see the esports arena that's installed at the Luxor, where they pay, in my opinion, an exorbitant amount of rent, because that's actually what typically happens in these facilities. When you see major installations in Las Vegas facilities in particular, usually what's happening is the approach is similar to what the casinos have done with other entertainment installations. They've created the space and then they rent it out to somebody else to fill that space. That may work, it may not work. We're actually still in the phase of testing this out. But that's a lot of what we've seen so far in terms of how Las Vegas has approached it. There have been a couple standalone arenas off of the Strip. Those are still sort of going through their growth phases to find out what works, what doesn't work. Can you have an event every day? If you bring in Ninja, that's a great event, but can you bring in Ninja 365 days a year? I can answer that for you. The answer is no. Mm-hmm. But sometimes that's a little bit of a misleading situation. You can see that major event and then think, great, this is how successful all of my events are going to be. But that perspective needs to be reshaped into a much more realistic, what else can we do with this space, whether it be with esports or with some other use, that to make this a successful component of a casino mix. And that's sort of the Las Vegas approach right now.
We've got a Slido question here saying that do you see high-profile casinos having small, grassroots esports setups that cater to a more regular crowd as esports becomes less stigmatized? Less stigmatized stands out there. Is there a stigma around esports in a European sense? Is there any kind of stigma around esports? Or, how do you view that?
I think maybe potentially people that don't quite understand esports. Some of the challenges when we've spoken to some of the general managers of some of our venues, they don't quite understand it. And I think part of the piece of work that we're doing is about education, and educating our general managers and understanding what this is all about, and just kind of briefly going over the spaces that we've seen in Vegas. I think for us, a lot of our venues have got flexible venue space. So one day they can be doing, a Counter-Strike tournament. The next day they can be hosting the Goliath poker tournament. Very, very flexible. And in terms of kind of regular space within some of our venues, a bit like some of the concepts that we've seen within the UK, that's something that could potentially happen. It would all depend on, getting the right research and making sure that we get exactly what people want in place. And I think that those sorts of spaces will be very, very important in terms of the growth of UK sports and building local communities.
So to speak to the States as well, so yes, there are regular grassroots events that happen both nightly and weekly. It varies by casino. The Luxor have a partnership with Unicorn, who are a wider esports company. They put regular tournaments on. There's playing things like Madden and fighting games, and typically more accessible titles that people might just play in their front room with their friends as a far less intense social activity than playing a more hardcore esports game like a Counter-Strike or a Dota or a League of Legends. And that's really important if you're a casino that's looking to enter the space or to increase your involvement in the space, because the crucial thing around esports, and this kind of touches on is there a stigma, is there isn't a stigma from the fans, except it's absolutely crucial that you enter in an authentic way. So just doing a one-off event, okay, great if it's of a suitable scale, but if you really want to see a benefit from things, this has to be a wider strategy. So that can include things like having regular tournaments. It can include things like having viewing parties, so that if you put an area in your bar where fans can come in and watch events, and if they ask the general manager, hey, can you put on a Twitch stream of the LCS semi-finals, that they're going to go, yeah, of course, or it's there already. And there are challenges of this on a technical standpoint in terms of broadcasting. Most events for esports are either on Twitch or on YouTube or on Facebook, which obviously is different from changing the channel on satellite. But the plus side is all these events are free to air currently. But the main thing is that if you want fans to embrace a venue, it needs to not be seen. You need to give the perception that you care about this and take it seriously, rather than, hey, this is the new fad, let's just do it because my kid plays Fortnite and therefore we should do something around Fortnite. However, on the flip side of that, if you put an installation in your casino where there are a few PCs and people can come in and play Fortnite, and if they win a game, then maybe they get a $10 restaurant voucher, that feels like a pretty authentic activation. So really it's crucial that you look at things in a wider scale rather than just a, hey, what can we do kind of as a one-off, if you really want fans to embrace it and come back.
John, what counts as authentic here?
I think the way we went around the pilot project, I think, Rank could have done something huge around esports if it wanted to. So financially could have thrown a huge prize pool as a one-off tournament and then walked away from it if it hadn't worked. But they decided to partner with an organisation that's known for putting on community-level events. We intentionally kept the prize pool relatively low as well, so that it didn't attract massive teams that were just going to come and push people out. Of the events we put on, maybe 2 or 3 teams turning up were known established teams. The rest are all mixes, people from the local area who just thought, you know what, we're going to go and play Counter-Strike at the nearest Grosvenor. And the fact that Callum was there as a representative from the casino, we were there as relatively familiar faces within that particular game scene. And staff could come and talk to us. You know, it wasn't just seen as a big corporate entity trying to enter esports. That really did work for us, and because of that, we've got some really good feedback out at the end of it, and we've got that ongoing dialogue with the players now as well.
What do you think the future is, Brett, in terms of esports in Nevada? Separate aside from esports betting, but just in terms of esports, what can you see as being the potential for tournaments and events?
Well, I get asked this question all the time. I don't know anybody who has an actual answer to it. There's plenty of opportunities for this to continue to grow. I think we'll continue to see, as Luke has described, a number of different forms of activations, how this can take place in different casino spaces. And I think we'll continue to see that sort of individualization. This is not the type of thing where you can install esports as is, as you know it, across the board. Each entity approaches it differently, in the same way that each entity approaches entertainment more broadly in a different way. It's different according to so many different things. The space in which it sits, the type of casino that exists there, the culture of the company itself. Some cultures are significantly more receptive than others. You may have noticed that some of the companies we described fit into a specific list. There are other companies whose names you won't hear us say because they simply don't have an esports activation in any way. They're not pursuing it at all. It doesn't fit within the culture of their organization. So with that in mind, I think we're going to continue to see a broader approach to this. I don't think we're going to see any specific form of esports across the board.
Okay. I think it's also important to acknowledge that when looking at esports in terms of where this goes, is that this is a much longer term play than a what can this do for me right now. I think coming back to the initial point about slots and an aging demographic, an important thing to realize is that younger kids, let's even say, from early 20s, even down to children now who are going to be customers in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, these people have had a very different experience growing up to current slot players, because all these people are growing up with video games at their fingertips, which are high quality. The realism of video games and these esports games that people are playing and just casual games, they are a far higher quality experience playing, taking out the gambling aspects and the thrill of that, is that this is a much higher quality experience than playing slots. So when looking at what esports can do for a casino, and I would view it as more of what general computer gaming can do for casinos, this is really looking at future-proofing. So, for example, we're starting to see, and these games are primitive, but we're starting to see skill-based gaming with obviously a random factor coming into the marketplace. Now, for me, looking at these products as a gamer now, I'm going, well, these are still far too primitive, but if I was in a casino, would I be more inclined to play a slot machine, or would I be more inclined to play a shooting game? I mean, I'd probably go for the latter, because initially because it's novel, but I know that if I could play a Counter-Strike clone or a Call of Duty clone that was the same quality for money with the random element built in. So the way these games work is that essentially you have to shoot a number of targets that come up in a certain way and so forth, and the difficulty of the level is what is on the RNG rather than it just being a pure skill thing. Obviously there's that weighting, which I can't speak to the maths behind, but looks relatively to make sense. That starts to be far more appealing to a customer in the future, and as technology gets developed and as there's a reason for people to develop higher quality technology, that's going to be attractive for patrons and bring people in rather than just what's quite a dated slots experience.
I'm afraid that's going to have to be it. I've got to get off to an appointment. Thanks for the panel. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Callum. Thanks, Luke. And thanks, John.